Today we have with us Siyaves Azeri. He's going to speak about the ideal match on the reality of thinking.
Actually, the question I was originally going to talk about is the relation between physics and mathematics, which I think is a subset of the question about the relation between thinking and reality, or about the reality of thinking. So the famous physicist Eugen Wigner, in his speech when he receives the Nobel Prize, states that the relation between physics and mathematics, that means the problem of applicability of mathematics in physics, is something that is almost like a miracle, that it does not have any rational explanation. So says also Paul Dirac, another very famous physicist and a Nobel Prize laureate. So Wigner actually, he admits that the question that he's addressing, that is the relation between mathematics and physics, is in fact itself a variation of another miracle, what he calls a miracle. That is the miracle of the match between human thinking and reality. That is that we have natural laws in nature, orders, like invariances, and that human thinking is able to understand these laws, to formulate these laws as well. So this is in fact a mystified formulation of the problem of the relation between thinking and being. To put it more clearly, the question concerning the relation between mathematics and physics, as I said, it's a variant of the problem of veracity of thinking. How human thinking and human knowledge match reality. Marx formulates this question in a materialist dialectical language in the second thesis on Feuerbach, as you may all know. The thesis goes, the question whether objective truth can be attributed to human thinking is not a question of theory, but a practical question. Man must prove the truth, that is, the reality and power, the decidedness of his thinking in practice. The dispute over the reality or non-reality of thinking that is isolated from practice is a purely scholastic question. So, to put it in a nutshell, the problem of the identity of thinking and being, of which the relation between mathematics and physics is a variation, is resolvable through a proper understanding of the concept of the ideal as the internalized schemata of, or forms of socio-historical human activity. So my proposition is that if we acquire a proper grasp of what Ilyenkov defines as the ideal, this problem, this supposedly miraculous match between reality and thinking, and in particular between mathematics and physics, could be resolved with much ease. I mean, the problem would, as a matter of fact, would be resolved for good. Ilyenkov states that for Marx, the ideal is not all mentality, but a much more specific formation, the form of socio-human mentality, meaning that the ideal belongs to the realm of social consciousness.
Of ideal or ideality. The ideality of the value form does not mean that it resides in individual minds. It can be reduced neither to cerebral and neurodynamic processes, nor to any physical or chemical property of a specific bearer, say gold or paper money or credit cards, so on and so forth. Value form exists only as a specific social form that corresponds to historically specific form of human productive activity. So Ilyenkov himself puts it in this particular context like this. Ideality in general is a characteristic of the materially established, materialized, reified, objectified images of social human culture. That is, the historically formed modes of social human life, which confront the individual possessing consciousness and will as a special supernatural objective reality, as a special object comparable with material reality and situated on one and the same spatial plane, and hence often conflated with it. So, in order to answer the question regarding the relation between thinking and reality, thus I think that we should answer 3 questions based upon this. These questions are, what is thinking? The second question is, what is knowledge? And the third question is, what is praxis? And then we will understand what is ideal, as a matter of fact, and then how these problems can be resolved, the problem of the match between reality and thinking. So what is thinking? I just begin with that. Thinking is outward activity. I say that it is not about things, but it is thinking things. So it's kind of acting on things. Thinking is a peculiar form of activity. Thinking activity of the thinking body has an objective character in that it is the ability to handle an object intelligently. That's how Ilyenkov defines it, In other words, genuine thinking that yields knowledge means treating the object of knowledge in concordance to the rules dictated by the nature of object, and not one's own mere fantasies. This in turn is the expression of object relatedness and tool-mediated nature of thinking and knowing. In this sense, there is no knowing or knowledge in general. Knowledge is always knowledge of the thing or of the object or of objectivities. However, the objectivity or object relatedness of thinking does not mean its subsumption under the rules of an alien nature. Because thinking is, as Ilyenkov says, thinking body's rational understanding of the general laws of its own behavior within the natural whole, its understanding of the modes of its action within nature, and its understanding of nature's bodies. In giving itself a rational account of what it does and how it really does it, a thinking body at the same time forms a true idea of the objects of its activity. So following this, I would say that the law of nature is the law of human activity in nature. It is mediated by substance nature. It is through this mediation of which thinking body's activity, the very thinking included, and matter are 2 necessary attributes, that the form of thinking activity coincides with the form of material existence, notwithstanding the specific socio-historical mode of this activity. So further on thinking, when thinking requires abstraction, as I said, there is no thinking in general, and so thinking and abstraction, they have historical specific social forms. So let me bring this, like by abstraction, what do we mean by abstraction? To abstract is to create meaning, or what we refer to as social significance. So meaning production consists in tool making, because tools, they have social significance. But what tool making itself means is, it means to turn a mere object into an instrument of activity by emancipating the object from its immediate environment. So this is the first form of abstraction that we have, actually, just taking a mere object, it's a piece of stone, and thinking of it and reuse it, let's say, for a certain task a day after or 3 days after. This is abstraction. This is a real abstraction, so to say. At the most indeterminate or abstract level, abstracting means, therefore, turning a mere object into a specific tool of specific action. What is peculiar or particular, significant, actually, about our mode of activity, let's say as members of modern society, is actually a new form of activity that we gain. I mean, a new form of ability to act that we gain with the use of concepts. I think this is what is very decisive and distinctive about modern form of activity, and I mean, in particular, in modern form of knowledge production. So let's see. In this, so concepts, like all human art-made artifacts, are ideal. According to Ilyenkov, the ideal denotes the objective form of human activity. The form of human activity carved in the object, or subjective form of human activity determined by the form of object. The gist of the matter is the concept of human activity, of course. Human being social nature, thus, is an ideal nature. So the question that is before us is identification of the source of universality and objectivity of the ideal or of the concept. In other words, the problem of the ideal is the problem of truth value of universal knowledge, understood as the laws of knowledge, as the laws of knowledge remaining invariant in all diverse changes in mental states, and not only individual but also entire intellectual formation, epochs, and peoples. So this is Ilyenkov. But based upon this, I say that conceptual systems, I mean, because there is a link, of course, between concepts and ideal. You know, like concepts are a particular form of ideal artifacts, I would say. Conceptual systems consist of concepts, of course, in particular in sciences. Conceptual systems facilitate interaction with reality at a whole new level. They become tools enabling higher level of abstracting and constitute a new set of schemata of activity in the process of metabolic exchange between human beings and social nature. That is the process of knowledge production, where knowledge signifies the activity of manipulating the social reality. Knowledge is revealed in human activity that is constituted at the line of contact between human being and nature. Human activity in nature is this continuum itself. By this continuum, I mean the point of, or the line of contact between humans and the environment, the surrounding. So that's why knowledge is not reducible to its forms of incarnation, and it only reveals itself just at the point of contact. It is something that comes out only in this particular form of activity. In a sense, we can think of knowledge, for instance, in this sense, of conceptual knowledge, like the labor power, like labor power. I mean, it is just a potentiality that is actualizable only in the process of production. So although we can think about it by itself, I mean, as itself, as is, you know, like, I mean, not as such, but in reality, it's just a potentiality that is that is not separable from the laboring person. So is knowledge, I would say, that with concepts. That's why I say it cannot be reduced into its forms of incarnation, let's say in forms of propositions or formula, but it has to come always at, it is realizable only in the act of knowing individuals, or the social individual. Just to quote Ilyenkov himself, says, one can compare a concept with an object, since a concept or thought is not an independent phantom hovering outside the world, but the form of activity of a real man in real space. A concept is not a state of cerebral cortex, but a form of activity of social man who transforms nature. Hence, the comparison of a concept with its object is not a comparison of a thing with a thing, as was the case in Feuerbach, but a comparison of the form of man's activity with the product and result of this activity. Prior to contemplation, man acts practically with real things, and in the process of this activity, all his representations are formed. So, just to wrap it up, therefore, we can say that, you know, like thought is a spatially expressed bodily action of a spatially organized body. And exactly for this reason, the relation between thought and body is not a causal one. They are not two different things, but one and the same thing, manifested in two different ways. Quote, to put it again at Ilyenkov, the relation that exists between a thinking body and thought is not a cause and effect relation, but the relation of an organ to its function, to its mode of action. And so I come to the second question now in this regard. What is knowledge? And a subset of this question, as a matter of fact, or actually the question of knowledge, or what knowledge is, it's itself related to the question of perception and question of cognition. We can maybe discuss them later in Q&A. Just try to be quick as possible and schematic as possible. So, to understand what knowledge is, first of all, we have to try to, like understand what its nature. Knowledge is tool-mediated and object-oriented. As just explained, knowledge is always knowledge of objects. What does it mean? I think this requires a little bit explanation. That knowledge is always knowledge of objects. For instance, think about galaxies, the farthest galaxies, or think about our very theoretical, formulations or conceptual systems. The point is that, galaxies or whatever, the reality, the whole reality is object of knowledge, is knowable to the extent that it is part of social activity, historically formed social activity. Like the example that we can give is, for instance, humans do not, the very first humans, let's say, when they look at the stars for the first time, they do not look at them out of curiosity or just with quote unquote metaphysical questions, what are these? But they have some sort of practical relation with the stars. They use it, for instance, maybe as their compass, or they use them with the stars, or they're related to stars, or the stars are part of the social life or the social knowledge as means of, for instance, following the changes of the seasons, so to say. So it is in this sense that knowledge is always knowledge of the object. We don't have, and this is the source of objectivity of human knowledge, of course. So that knowledge is object-oriented means that, it means that the objects of knowledge are related to the extent that they are just part of the constituent parts of social activity. And that it is tool-mediated, of course, we always, just like the human activity itself, the most basic human activity, let's say, we always use tools. It could be just as quote unquote simple as human hand or other type of tools, any like an axe, a hammer, and so the concepts as well. So it is tool mediated. What comes in with the tool mediatedness of knowledge is that like the tool dictates its form on the on form of knowing, so to say, and just a simple tool like a spoon, for instance, dictates a particular form of bodily action for reaching out to soup and eat it, for instance, or a knife, a hammer, so on and so forth. So is like with other type of tools, let's say with conceptual tools, these conceptual tools as well kind of determine. We have to learn their form in order to be able to put them in action. So that's the thing. So I would say that in this sense, knowledge is the manipulation of social reality through deploying socially available tools that facilitates such manipulation in this sense. Manipulation here, I don't use it in a negative sense, just to make it handy. I just use it in a very, very practical thing, sense. So and then here we arrive at the third question, of course, so what is praxis? Because it seems that knowledge, it's revealed only, as I said, only in activity and only in practice, okay? So what do we mean by praxis or practice or activity? What is necessary, I think, is conceptualization of activity as a philosophical category, or what, like in later Soviet philosophy, for instance, is taught about, it's conceptualization of activity as a logical category. I would rather say philosophical category, as I said. And it is something that I believe that Marx has in mind when he's thinking about praxis or practice in the thesis on Feuerbach. The thing is first of all, praxis is a social category, I mean, like, to understand it. It is not a pragmatic category. It is not reducible to very personal activities. I mean, it is not that. It is, you know, it is realizable, you know, against a background of historically and socially formed, I'd say, universe, so to say, or reality. So even the personal, in this sense, the personal activity of one, the pragmatic activity of one person, as a matter of fact, is just an instantiation of this socially and historically formed activity. So that's, we have this in forms of activity. They have been, so to say, objectivized as schemata, as a schemata of human activity. And humans, in order to be able to act, even at personal level, they have to act according to this schemata. So this is the first thing I'd say. So that's why I say that it is, that praxis is not pragma. It is not a particular person's practical activity, but it is a social, it's social. That is, it has a social form which is related to this specifically, historically specific mode of human activity. I mean, it is bound to tools specific to the mode of activity. At the mode of a social capitalist activity, for instance, and okay, I'm sorry. So, in that when we talk about this social form schemata, so I mean we have to, and this, I'm sorry, emphasis on this social nature of practice or activities. That, you know, like, as I said, in every social, I would say every social era or every social mode of production or mode of production, there's certain tools available to us that determine the particular, the particular form of activity in that era. To the extent that knowledge, for instance, knowledge production is concerned in our society, in capitalist society in general, I mean, it's following the, let's say, formation of capitalism and the formation of modern, the emergence of modern science. It seems that we have the capability of actualizing or realizing pure theoretical activity. So that's what I wanted to come up with. So it is with modern science, for instance, and with the rise of capitalism, that some sort of, let's say, armchair thinking or pure mathematical thinking begins, or pure physical thinking, I mean, theoretical physics, for instance, so on and so forth. This is possible, as a matter of fact, because it is with the rise of capitalism that society is really organized in form of a metabolism, becomes a social metabolism, so to say. So this particular specific division of labor, social division of labor, as a matter of fact, makes it possible, makes pure theoretical thinking possible. And in many cases, if we do not understand, if we do not conceive of practice as a social category in this sense, if we reduce it to just, you know, like the pragmatic or practical activities of one individual as something that just we do with our bodies, natural bodies, then we would lose sight actually of this relation between the so-called pure theoretical activity and theoretical thinking with human activity. So it is this social nature or social makeup of praxis that makes pure theoretical thinking itself possible. So just to put it in form of a quote from Ilyenkov itself, says, Marx found that only what has been transformed previously into an object of activity, only what has already been drawn into the process of social man's life activity, into the process of social labor, immersed in the retort of production, becomes an object of contemplation. Since the activity discussed here is the activity of social man and not of an individual, all products of this activity appear to the individual as objects of the same kind as stars, stones, trees, and mountains. So, just to wrap it up, I hope I didn't lose it. From the affirmation, that becomes clear that these three questions that we ask, I mean, like what is praxis, what is knowledge, and what is thinking, they are in fact interrelated questions. As a matter of fact, they are different facets of the same phenomenon. That is the relation between human and reality. Thus follows the problem of the identity of thinking and being. The problem of the identity of thinking and being, that is the question of the reality or the disworthiness of thinking, is resolved in human activity. True thinking amounts to production of true, tool-mediated and object-oriented knowledge, which in turn acquires an ideal form, where the latter signifies the objectivized form of human activity or the subjectivized form of object. The ideal here denotes the objective form of human activity, the form of human activity printed on the object, and the subjective form of human activity determined by the form of object. Now, just to wrap it up again, as a matter of fact, it's very simple in a sense what I say. How thinking and reality are related, it's because thinking is a particular form of human activity. It is in the activity of human, it's socially determined form of activity that reality of thinking flourishes. So if I want to relate this back to the very first question I asked about the relation between, for instance, theoretical mathematics and theoretical physics, and pure mathematics and theoretical physics, well, we can think of these as two different schemata of human action, of course, historically formed schemata of action, and thus the match between these two schemata is not something miraculous. I mean, if there is a miracle, it's the miracle of human activity itself, I would say. What in particular is interesting about this match, I mean, about what makes possible the match of these two schemata is the quantified way of, like approaching reality. So all in all, I would go back, like once we do away with this idea, the old age idea that thinking is something that happens in head, that it is something purely mental. Once we just, like do away with the identification of thinking with mental or thought with mental, then we can just do away, as a matter of fact, this problem, as a matter of fact, of the identity of thinking and being in itself, it is not only resolved, but it evaporates. To the extent that the relation between mathematics and physics is concerned, as I said, it is this particular way of approach to reality in quantified form that makes this match possible. So I would say that in that particular case, the more interesting question is not why these two branches, for instance, or two schemata of human activity match, but why, for instance, mathematics is not it's not much applicable or does not match, let's say, biology to great extent, for instance, or economics or other forms of activity. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say. I hope I try to be schematic and very formal, I know, in the formalistic. I hope we can open this up in question and answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very rich, and yeah, I hope we can get a discussion going, starting with Sasha. Okay, Sasha, you want to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Siyaves. Very general question, because just reread the text by Michael Lifshitz, you probably know, who wrote a critique of his friend's conception of the ideal. So probably you know what what I want to ask, how you see the relation of social constructivism in Ilyenkov with this kind of, let's say, realism, the whole conception brings forth as well.
Shall I answer? Yeah, okay. Well, one thing about social construction is, of course, it's a very, I know, umbrella term, but something in general that they have, I think all these forms, is that, like, they reduce, as a matter of fact, the knowledge or concepts or whatever you want to call them into some sort of socially decided discourse. Like, I mean, they reduce knowledge or concept into some sort of social consensus. Let's say consensus among members of what they call members of a scientific community, right? So it's very interesting, but they still, like, are bound to this very, very, like, traditional way of understanding, I'm sorry, of concepts, for instance, or of thinking as mental. But it is socially mental now, instead of just being personally mental. But still, it is reduced into discourse, language, words, whatever you want to call it. Whereas I think, not I think, I mean, but the idea, the ideality, or the ideal, or the ideality of concept, of the reality of concept, or the reality of ideal for Ilyenkov is not something that is reducible to, not only it is not reducible to consensus, let's say, but it is there as a particular realm by itself. In his article on the ideal, the dialectic of the ideal, for instance, like that, he praises Plato for properly formulating the question. Not only, I mean, but properly formulating the question, being aware of the question that ideals, they have a reality of their own. But the whole thing is, for Ilyenkov says that, like, what is the distinction between idealism and materialism is that, like, idealism deals with or treats the question of the reality of ideal in a speculative way, whereas materialism, true materialism or practical materialism, should bring, I would say, that real, reveals the real process of generation of this ideal and how it becomes objectivized. So how it becomes objective. So that's I think that's a very main difference between Ilyenkov's, like,
okay,
let's say, handling of concepts and social construction.
Okay, thanks. And Alba, sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. I think you had your hand up earlier. Yeah, so if you want to unmute yourself. You're currently mute, but if you do have a question, please unmute yourself. Or Karina, if you could unmute yourself before him.
I forgot to unmute, but last reacted to applause Siyaves. This was not a question.
Oh, it wasn't a question. Okay. Does anyone have a question?
Yeah.
Sergey.
Thank you. You have said in your report that knowledge is always a knowledge of something. And it's quite obvious, even for not materialists, like for idealists, even for subjective idealists, that knowledge is always a knowledge of some object. But the question remains, what is the nature of that object? And that is why my question is, how would you explain materialistically that the nature of object that we try to understand, that it is outer, from the outer world, that it's not just a matter of our own imagination, what we imagine, and that is why we can understand it, and why it is not I don't know, like Hegelian absolute spirit, that there is no difference between me and object inside the absolute idea. So how do you prove that there is actually any reality, material reality?
Okay. Well, that knowledge is always knowledge of object. Yes, maybe almost everybody somehow, even verificationists and falsificationists, so on and so forth, they agree on that. But there is one particular thing. What I mean by following Ilyenkov, I understand as objectivity or object relatedness or knowledge being the knowledge of object is that it can only comes out at the moment of activity. Whereas, you know, for the verificationist or for the falsificationist, for instance, knowledge is something that is produced somehow here, mental, in the head of, you know, like one scientist or many scientists, it doesn't matter. And then it has to taken and be applied to reality. Okay, it has to be compared, for instance, to reality, whatever it is. It has to be compared to its object. And this is weird because then we go into an infinite regress. Because in order to be able to compare a picture, let's say, of something and the reality of something, then I have to have a third point, meaning that I have to have both knowledge of the thing and knowledge of the picture, so on and so forth. So it becomes irresolvable. And that's why, you know, like, for instance, many brands of positivism easily yield to some different types of, you know, like social constructionism or different types of idealism, so to say. So this is the difference. You know, that's why we have to underline this, you know, like that knowledge comes out only in the activity. I mean, and it is in this sense that it is the knowledge of object. That's why in Ilyenkov, in our schools should teach us how to think. He says that, you know, like, if knowledge is something that should be applied, then it is not knowledge. Because knowledge is already applied, you know, like, it has to be like that. So this is the first thing. The second, as for the difference between Hegel and what was, can you repeat that part of your question? I'm sorry.
How can we distinguish our knowledge of thing and the object? That object is something of inseparable reality from ours. That is not a product of absolute spirit, and that is why we can understand it, because just as our knowledge is an emanation of absolute spirit, and the real object is, of course, emanation. Why absolute spirit is not the third thing that combines it?
Well, I would answer the question beginning with this as one of it. Okay, you know, like Marx, I don't remember, in one of his letters, he says that, you know, like, addressing this question about is there is reality or not as just a caprice of metaphysician, you know, like, first of all. So it is, I mean, it is beyond obvious for somebody like Marx and like Ilyenkov, because the very reality of object reveals itself in the fact that I have to act as a human being. I mean, that's the question, you know. I can ask Hegel, why for any reason the spirit, you know, like, has to emanate? It's just the same question I ask the theologian. Why God needs to create the universe after his image? You know, there should be a reason for that. So that's why it does not answer. I mean, like, it remains there, you know, like, and it's remain all in abstract and so on and so forth. So it is in the activity that my knowledge comes. So the necessity of activity, as a matter of fact, the necessity of activity is the guarantee or the verification of the reality of being and of my reality as well. And it is only within this metabolic relationship that my reality becomes subjective reality and the reality of the world becomes the objective reality. You know, so it is again within this cycle of action that, as to use Marx's words, for instance, that nature becomes humanized and human becomes naturalized or natural, for instance. So I think this emphasis on activity or on praxis, as a matter of fact, does away with this question about the reality of, I mean, the existence of reality or objective reality and so on and so forth.
Okay, and I think Olga, did you have a
Thank you.
question as well?
Thank you, Siyaves. But what do you think about such a situation when your activity, even bodily activity, does not exclude the possibility that you just impose to the object your a priori form, and in such a way the result of your activity will be transcendental, mental and bodily result, but it does not take into consideration the reality in itself of those subject matter who became a victim of your activity.
Pardon me, can you elaborate a little bit more? I just want to get the question correctly, please.
To repeat, if I understand you adequate, you say that the criteria of authenticity is a bodily process of action, material practice, but does not cannot exclude that your activity and even bodily activity, your activism, may occur aggressive activism, may impose some a priori form to the object, and it will mean that you cannot take into consideration his own in itself form, yes? And that is why your knowledge will not be true, despite of material and bodily activity.
Okay, if I get it correctly, so the thing is this, of course, like that's why I wanted to emphasize on the social form of activity, like, so what I mean by social form, or what is meant by social form, is that, it is, I mean, its form is important itself, like the historically available form of activity. For instance, in a more general sense, for instance, think about our mode of activity under capitalism. I mean, the disasters that we are, like facing, in a sense. I don't know if I'm going on the right track or not with you, but that's, like that it is the social form of activity that, as a matter of fact, yield to these type of disastrous activities as well. Like this social form determines, as a matter of fact, what is defined by success, what is defined as knowledge, what is defined as, like good, so on and so forth. So, I mean, this does not exclude in this sense that the possibility, I mean, so it doesn't mean that knowledge is always good. I don't know, because the goodness of knowledge is defined within this particular social form. And I mean, or the success, like, for instance, quantification of nature. Why we do quantify? Well, perhaps because it is very successful. A way of successful manipulation of nature. But manipulation in what sense? In the sense of just exploiting it, like to the extent of, like of ruining the whole environment, so on and so forth. This is one thing. And the other thing, I said something about, I think I mentioned that as well, that it is this particular social form of social organization that makes possible pure theoretical activity that seems to be a priori. But I say it is not, in this sense, it is not. It is this division of labor that enables us, as a matter of fact, to use purely theoretical tools in order to produce knowledge. But not only that, I also mentioned in passing that, like with the rise of concepts, as a matter of fact, we acquire a second level of activity, a new level of activity, as a matter of fact, this social universe where the ideal resides, like. So it is not a sham, when we just armchair thinking, if there is such a thing, let's say we do that, it is very, I think, very probable that what we think has something to do with reality. It would be something like the match between our words and the external word, where the things that the words denote, like when you think about it, it's weird, like how is it that, I say tree and you understand it is a tree and not a cat, for instance. So it is, I don't think it is very different than that, though it is at a very different level because we use these conceptual tools, like that impose a new form of activity upon us. But again, the very form of this concept, or that the very form the ideal acquires itself, is not independent from social reality or the social mode of activity. That's, if I could understand that.
Okay, I certainly have a question, but I'll give others a chance first. Katie, then Karina. So, Katie, do you want to unmute yourself? You're still muted at the moment.
Thank you, Siyaves, for this very good survey, because it's a very important text. But before I ask the question, I wanted to comment on Sasha's question. It's really this contradiction between the standpoint of Ilyenkov and Lifshitz, because Lifshitz was also insisting on the ideal based on the material parameters. Yeah, but he was somehow against claiming that the ideal appears only on the level of social material stage. So materiality can be not only appearing on the social stage, but much earlier. Yeah, but then Ilyenkov didn't have chance to answer him, because Lifshitz wrote this after Ilyenkov's death. And we have to bear in mind that sociality for Ilyenkov was not certain kind of sociological parameter, but sociality was very intrinsic and generic. So it wasn't that sociality for Ilyenkov was after being, like Lifshitz imagined. So maybe we should think this way. Another question is this text. I was trying to trace it in Russian, and I see that it is only a draft of what afterwards developed into dialectical logic. Am I right? Because it also has these parts: Spinoza, Feuerbach, Marx. But then these chapters become bigger in dialectical logic. So, so am I right in a way that this is the core text? Because this is the first time I saw this text, even in Russian. And thank you for that. And my question is a little bit also a question to myself and to everyone who researches Ilyenkov, and also to you, because you touched upon this issue very much on activity and on labor as well, because there is some kind of opposition against Ilyenkov on the part of Simondonians. Simondonians who deal with the concept of technology, and for them technology is primary to activity, technology is primary to labor. But it is also, they try to adjust the Simondonian materialism of technique and technology also to emancipatory context of Marxism, so somehow see it in Marxian terms. But what is important in this Simondonian version, that it is precisely the person who is laboring, the person who is applying the tools, that cannot see what is taking place within the transformation and technological evolving and evolution of the thing. So for me, this is a radically anti-Marxist and almost a mystical position. So how to develop our team somehow weapons to confront this technologism and anti-activity standpoint. Maybe you would tell us some life hacks.
I touch upon this last issue. It's very important, I think. I mean, it's I would say, first of all, this point of view is kind of fetishistic, you know, like it's because it's a recapitulation of this idea of the ghost in the machine, or just this idea that it is the machine that does the work. Well, in a sense, it is correct. I tell, you know, like in a sense, you know, like if you read the chapter on machines in Capital Volume 1, for instance, you see that the workers, they really face machines. And Marx sometimes says they are correct in doing that as the capital itself, or as the capitalist itself, as a subject. It is a subject, but this is a way of, you know, it would be a very perverse way or an inverted way of seeing reality. Because after all, it is not the machine that does the work. Also, as an automatic thing, sometimes it might be able to do something by itself, quote unquote, by itself. But after all, the working of the machine, so to say, I call them all machine actually, even the new technology, the working of the machine is made possible only within, again, this social universe. So these machines, no matter what they are, how complicated they are, they're doing some particular thing for whoever deploy them. I mean, we don't have, I would formulate it like this. We don't have a machine that simply machines. Okay, there is no such a thing as pure machining. So if it was such a thing, I mean, like if what Simondonians or many others, like to some extent, cognitive capitalist thesis, you know, like people as well say, you know, like if it was the case, then we would have some sort of machining machine. I mean, a machine just machine for itself, you know, like so to say. I think this is rooted, as I said, in the idea in this idea of fetishism, and in this fetishistic idea actually of thinking of the universe, I mean, of a world, for instance, where we have this machine working, even does the thinking for us, you know, like I would say. As I just mentioned, the question in answer to Sergei, you know, like that the reality of the machine is realizable only in the necessity of action, of human activity. I mean, I don't know if I understood exactly this point, you know, like that. Definitely there is this, if I got it right, I'm sorry. So does it mean that, I just ask you, and maybe you discuss as well, please. So what this priority of technology over activity mean? I don't get that really. I mean,
well, the Simondonian construction is that there is invention, there is technical invention, and technical invention has nothing to do with labor. Technical invention is certain kind of cognitive invention, which doesn't have to do with this emancipatory construction of labor, and application of technology incorporating many people is exactly the construction of transindividuality and of this sociality, rather than decision to activate and to labor together, because labor as a Marxist concept is some kind of humanitarian concept. It's a very humanistic concept, because the subject of this action is a human being producing means of production, producing tools for labor. So what is labor? It's producing tools of labor. It's not simply laboring. But this production of tools of labor somehow subjects invention and what happens in invention, some kind of immanence of invention, to humanist generic intentionality. Whereas in technology, the primary thing is exactly what happens in this immanence of realization of invention. And labor is only extension, is something that we are having as some kind of supplementary complement. Therefore, I mean, yeah, it's really important to understand how to oppose this way. Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to quickly respond, Siyaves, then you can. Otherwise, I'll just move on to Karina. Okay, great. So Karina, and then I have a question, and then if anyone else has a question, that's great.
Yeah. Just quickly, it's really important the way you emphasize the category of concepts, or the concept as a category, because I was looking at this book here, which is the sort of Bible of what you could call academic understanding of knowledge, and it's been through about 20 editions, and it's the textbook everywhere. And guess what? The word concept does not appear, and I think that's very significant. It's got, not in the index, and it doesn't. It's not an issue. And I think that kind of really reveals the impoverished nature of this basically empirical Kantian approach that is what Ilyenkov is absolutely ferociously attacking in this reading. That is very much in line with what you've said, Siyaves. And just one other point: at the very beginning and right throughout, really, he's while he has a fantastic exposition of Feuerbach, he and raises him up, and then he demolishes him completely because he doesn't have a dialectical concept, and he says this is materialism without dialectics. And of course this is not, it appears academic is against Feuerbach, but of course this is against the whole tendency in Soviet science under Stalin, which he attacks right at the beginning, as a matter of fact, the article. And this was published in 1964 in Russia, Katie. As it says at the beginning of the article. So it was published, later than the abstract and concrete. I think it's very relevant to today's struggles in to grasp development, because the tendency within science is to always have a skeptical view about the possibility of a reality existing at all, and that reality is, as they say, it's quantumly entangled with our knowledge, and that we have this is all there is the quantum entanglement, and we don't have any, there's nothing that we can measure things against, because everything is quantumly entangled. I think maybe you want to comment on that. Thank you.
If you do have any response there, then you can, yeah.
Just one thing about what Katie said. Just one thing. I think, like, there is a problem with the usages of concepts, of terms, and so on and so forth. Like I would say, for instance, when we talk about labor or when we talk about material, that's why I try to say we're not talking about simply something that I do with my hand, or even with my personal thinking or thought. And when we say talking about material reality, we are not only talking about physical reality. So that's what's the difference between Marxist practical materialism from Feuerbachian materialism. It is not a substance materialism, or what Majdansky says, somatic materialism. It is not a somatic materialism. And I think that there's Simondonians and others that you mentioned, and many others, they still recapitulate this understanding of they work within this somatic materialism framework. That I'd say.
Thank you. I did have a point, and then to anyone who hasn't spoken, it would be great. We do have time for a few more questions after that. So one thing, just to tie a few of the threads together, and one sort of entirely separate approach. So just tying what Sasha and Katie were saying. So obviously Ilyenkov, and after Ilyenkov, there was this tension with a few theorists saying that the ideal exists outside of the human, that there's the ideal is formed through other processes, etc. In the paper that you shared, it begins with Spinoza's parallelism, and then Ilyenkov says, but there's a limitation within that Spinozan parallelism because it doesn't account for the ideal, and he's saying it's human. But there was a tradition, not just in the people opposing Ilyenkov, saying, well, we need to apply the concept of ideal all across. But okay, yes, there's Simondon, and then after Simondon, there's Deleuze, and then today we have all of these new materialisms. And Katie, you were talking about machines, but actually within new materialism, if we're really talking about things like physics, there are people who talk about the ideal of the compost heap, that the compost heap is engaged in activity, and then there are emergent potentials, and there's a sort of a virtual potentiality from the different things in the compost heap interacting. I'm not saying I embrace it, but I wonder if you had any thoughts about the kind of new materialist take on the idea of physics, because the whole point there is that we're in some ways chauvinist, that in terms of machines are produced all the time by things that are inhuman and that are within what Ilyenkov calls the real, and yet they're emerging, we can still say dialectically, but outside of human labor. There's that tradition. And then just to throw it in, only if you have anything interesting to say about it, the Badiou critique and response to that. So with Badiou, where you have everything is mathematics, and then okay, so everything is a set, every set is not all, and then for example the world is structured in a certain way, and then as a result of that, because of the structure of the world, the French Revolution happens as an event, then afterwards we recognize the event. So you have, because of maths, things are structured and then they're recognized later, and that's a kind of a true procedure. If that's not something you're interested in, just ignore that. But I was just interested whether you were had any opinions about where these debates are at the moment in the either new materialist object-oriented ontology line, or this kind of Badiou sense of everything is mathematical, it's mathematical all the way down. Yeah.
It's a question for Siyaves.
For Siyaves,
Yeah,
yeah.
go. Okay, just
if you
I will be very short. You know, like I mean, the whole thing I was trying to bring up was that, you know, like this idea itself is, again, you know, like some sort of looking at the order of things, or at the order of reality in an upside down way. You know, for instance, saying that I mean, this is like a claim saying that the language of the universe is mathematics. Well, you can just say those type of things, you know, like the language of the universe is human language. You can also say that, you know, like, but these doesn't mean anything in particular, you know, like, I mean, for me, what is more important is, you know, like the finding that the real reasons, I mean, that or reconstruct the process of generation, or say the genesis of all these, you know, like particular forms of activity that we have, and their specificities, you know, like, I mean, because I have simple questions. I mean, like, for instance, why is it the case that certain mathematical laws can be invented or discovered, if you wish, what I say invented, just at a particular historical period? Why certain physical laws are available to certain, that they become available, or they become invented or discovered at a particular social, like society, form of society. Well, if you ask, for instance, somebody like Quine, he would say that, well, because we are smarter, and you won't have any better answer than that, but I wouldn't think like that, like I said, this is still, like recapitulates this mystified idea about, like all these capabilities. And that's somehow why we try to bring in concepts, because that the type of, like understanding of science, for instance, that I'm trying to come up with is to deal with scientific, I would say, scientific theories and so on and so forth, as particular forms of machines. And by machine, I'm not talking just about mechanical machines, so that's what I say. So these are like conceptual machines or conceptual tools, for instance. And again, they are part of all this larger social activity, I would say.
Okay. It would be great, because we need to wind up quite soon. If someone needs to urgently go, then please do. But it would be great to have time for one or two more questions, specifically from people we haven't heard from. So is there anyone who hasn't spoken during the session who would like to make a point or raise a question? Okay, Andrew, thank you.
Hello, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the conversation, the discussion, and the talk. My thought is that the level that you were discussing key issues, I was really thinking that don't we need to think about the concept of substance, real infinite totality? That's my first thought. That's quite an important category at that Spinoza level. And that's what you would oppose to absolute spirit. That's the difference. They're two different. And then the other thought is on concepts. There's the idea that the concept gets the real essence of the object. And that's very important too. So I wondered what you thought about those 2 points.
Well, I answered the second question, the second part, that concepts that they grab the real essence of the things. I can even go further than that they build the essence of the thing, as a matter of fact, so because concepts, in my understanding, are tools. Even when you think about the word itself, these are interesting things. A concept is something that brings in or makes groping of the things available, that's how we take the thing. So whatever that we grope becomes the essence, depending on how we grope it, of course, so at what level we grope it, so to say. So that's what I understand of concepts as, like grasping the essence of things. Of course, like one part of it would be grasping the generic root of, let's say, different phenomena that we have. But even that, like that grasping of the generic root itself, it depends on what I'm right now doing with this available phenomenon before me. So to the extent that I put in use, let's say, or I interact, as a matter of fact, with this phenomenon, it becomes available to me, and I grasp its essence further and farther, and it's not once and for all. That's why, in this sense, with the use of it, thanks to concepts, our knowledge is finite and infinite at the same time. It is infinite in the sense that it is always knowledge of the thing in itself, because thing in itself is what has been grasped by the, by the concept. And it is finite because we know that, as the extent of, the limits of activity, of human activity expand, or the limits of praxis expand, the limit of the thinkable expands as well. And so the consequent knowledge that comes out of this material interacting in the most general sense, okay? So that's how I think, what concepts do. The first part of your question, I couldn't follow you. I'm sorry. Can you repeat it, please? About Spinoza and Hegel.
So, I'm thinking about the chapter on Spinoza and dialectical logic. As you think about, you said quite a lot which is in there, but that culminates very much, and it's a very important part. it's talking about, well, thought is related to a totality, the infinite, and that's a very important element of thought. And what Spinoza described it as is substance. And you already paraphrased Spinoza on thought as and being as two different aspects of the one substance. And it's very important that substance ultimately is then defined as the totality of objects, infinite in extent, unlike the finite objects. That's a really, fundamental contradiction. The heart of understanding what knowledge is, what thought is, what matter is that infinite totality, which is a generative function as well. The substance generates the particulars in front of us. So that dialectic's really, really important to Ilyenkov. Does that help you understand I didn't see that coming through so much. So I'm just trying to probe you a bit on that.
Well, one thing about, I think, Ilyenkov's relation to Spinoza, I'm not very good with the Spinoza. I mean, I've read him, but I don't claim that I know or whatever. But for instance, Oitinen thinks that Ilyenkov's Spinoza is Ilyenkov's Spinoza, which I think it is the case, because after all, substance for Spinoza is something else than what Ilyenkov understands as substance. I tend to read Ilyenkov's substance as the social reality of human being. This is where the whole process of thinking, of action, like activity, thinking, so on and so forth, reveals itself. It is with humans, actually, with human social reality, with human social existence, that this whole process begins. This doesn't mean undermining the reality of existence by itself, not at all. But I think he's, in this sense, truthful to Marx's, formulations, in particular in the German ideology, in his discussions arguments against Feuerbach, that, a confrontation with matter as such, with the substance as such, and so on and so forth, or a formulation like that, is just, like an abstraction of mind. It's not realizable. It's not even real. It's not even a good abstraction of mind to use it, as a matter of fact. So because the reality of matter, of the substance, is itself a function of this confrontation or human activity in reality. And the whole dialectical process, I say this process of generation of the genesis of objectivity and subjectivity, which, they become unified and then negate each other, and then they are formed as new sorts of, subjectivities and realities, so on and so forth, is based upon this movement of substance. So I would say that substance is human, perhaps, or substance is human, active human being, this is not talking about some sort of humanism. I'm not saying that, but, or substance is revealed only in activity. It is inseparable from it, I would say. And this is how I think Ilyenkov avoids falling into this, I would say, trap of Kantianism, of the thing in itself, because once it is defined like that, this is like prioritizing action over the substance, so to say, if I borrow a sentence from Maidansky, so by this prioritization, it leaves outside whatever, any need for formulating some sort of thing in itself, or the unknowable. So everything is knowable, because everything is knowable to the extent that it is within the boundaries of human activity, or subject to that. Beyond that, we cannot think about anything else. As Marx says, because beyond that is unthinkable, and the unthinkable cannot be thought of. So simple. That's how I try to understand Ilyenkov's substance.
Thank you.
Thanks. I think, so unless someone who hasn't spoken does have a question they want to ask, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Siyaves, and thank you to all of our question raisers. I'm going to pass it back to Karina, but that was fascinating, certainly for me, and I'm sure you'll agree.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Siyaves, and thanks to everyone. It's been